Russia. Demography, war in the future. And I think we will go through the full history from the collapse of the USSR to 2035. In 1992, more people died in Russia than were born. This was the first time this happened in peacetime. At that moment, everything actually changed. Imagine a country that, over 30 years, lost as many people as some other states haven't even lost during a war. Not from bombs and not from an epidemic. Not bombs. From hopelessness. From vodka, from poverty, from its own political decisions. And then it added to that number hundreds of thousands more killed and maimed in a foreign country. And hundreds of thousands more who fled abroad to escape mobilization. This is the demographic story of modern Russia, and it explains almost everything that's happening today, from the shortage of workers to the inability to win the war, the very war it started itself. So, the Russian cross. How did it all begin? The collapse of the Soviet Union in December 1991 set in motion processes whose consequences Russia still feels to this day. In 1991, the population of the Russian Federation was 148.5 million people. Already the following year, an event occurred that demographers called the Russian cross. The mortality curve crossed the birth rate curve, and the country entered a period of steady natural decline. Population. This turning point was not a coincidence. It was a direct consequence of a systemic socio-economic collapse. Hyperinflation destroyed people's savings. Industry came to a halt. The healthcare system deteriorated. Male excess mortality, primarily from cardiovascular diseases and alcoholism, reached truly catastrophic levels. In the mid-90s, the average life expectancy of a Russian man was 57 to 58 years. This is the level of the poorest countries in the world. 57 years. The average life expectancy of a Russian man in the 90s. This is lower than in Africa. During the Soviet period, the total fertility rate was maintained at the level of 2.2 children per woman. This was roughly the replacement level. After 1991, all of this collapsed, reaching a historic minimum in 1999. 1.16. That is, for each woman, it's 1.16. Population replacement. Young couples faced with economic instability put off having children en masse. Housing became unaffordable. Kindergartens were closing. The prospects for employment were, to put it mildly, uncertain. The maternity capital program, introduced in 2006, had only a temporary effect. The fertility rate rose to 1.78. It still did not reach 2.1. In 2012-2015. However, this increase turned out not to be a structural change, but merely a postponement of births over time. Families carried out plans they had postponed, but the total number of children did not increase. After 2015, the rate began to steadily decline again, and in 2025, it's back to 1.4. The first wave of emigration. It took away a huge number of people of working age. So there was the ethnic emigration in the 1990s and 2000s, hundreds of thousands of Jews, Soviet Germans, and creative intellectuals, from 1 to 1.5 million people. The second wave was from 2014 to 2021. Young, educated professionals left after the annexation of Crimea. IT developers, scientists, journalists, entrepreneurs. The third and most powerful wave began on February 24, 2022. In just the first few months, how many people left Russia? Somewhere between 500,000 and 800,000 people, and then several 100,000 more men of conscription age left after the mobilization was announced. According to combined estimates, by 2026, the losses from the third wave amount to 1 million people. Young men with higher education. Every fallen soldier is not just a life, ladies and gentlemen. It's a future worker, a father, a taxpayer who is no longer here. The war in Ukraine has become the largest military disaster for Russia since World War II. According to Western intelligence agencies, the British Ministry of Defense, and independent analytical centers, by April 2026, the death toll amounted to somewhere around 180,000 people. The Kremlin has classified the real numbers. It's important to understand the demographic profile of those who died. The overwhelming majority are men aged 20 to 45, the core of the planet's working age and reproductive population. In this case, of the country. The classic ratio of wounded to killed in modern wars is 3 to 1 or 5 to 1. Applied to Russian losses, this means from 360 to 900,000 people with injuries of varying degrees of severity. A significant portion are limb amputations, traumatic brain injuries, spinal injuries, and concussions. A separate category is injury from the blast wave, which causes diffuse brain damage. These manifest as cognitive impairments, epilepsy, and severe mental disorders. Post-traumatic stress disorder affects, according to various estimates, from 20 to 40% of veterans. That's a huge number. The Russian psychiatric care system has historically not been adapted for mass treatment. This is a Soviet legacy, when mental disorders among the military were simply hushed up. They simply didn't exist. There was no sex and there were no mental disorders. The total losses, killed plus severely wounded and incapacitated, in 2026 are estimated to be between 400,000 and 600,000 people. By the way, if you found this material useful, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss new episodes. And for $4 a month, you'll get access to the bonus channel, exclusive content, and early access to new materials. The link will be in the description. Now, the big question the world fears. Tanks on the border with Poland. Russian squads, tough guys, or whatever they're called, in Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. In a strictly conventional sense, no, that means in the foreseeable 5 to 10 years, Russia does not have a real opportunity to attack NATO. There are several reasons, and they follow directly from everything mentioned above. Russia is already experiencing the maximum military strain in Ukraine that it is capable of without declaring full mobilization, with all its catastrophic political and economic consequences. The army is exhausted, has lost hundreds of thousands of experienced soldiers and officers, and has used up a significant portion of its Soviet-era equipment and ammunition reserves, opening a second front against a military alliance whose combined defense budget is, well, 20 times larger than Russia's is not a strategy, it's a catastrophe. The demographic deficit makes it physically impossible to replenish personnel in the required time frame. Since 1922, NATO has radically increased its presence on the eastern flank. Poland is building up one of the strongest ground forces in Europe. Finland and Sweden have joined the alliance. But this has significantly changed the strategic map of the Baltic region and the Arctic. Russia itself has worsened its strategic position by provoking exactly the NATO expansion it supposedly feared. There is, however, one important but. It's called nuclear weapons. And this completely changes the equation. Russia has the largest nuclear arsenal in the world, about 6,000 warheads. Nuclear deterrence works both ways. It is exactly what keeps NATO from direct intervention in Ukraine, and it is also the main tool Moscow uses to pressure the West. Russia doesn't need to attack. Conventionally, it's enough to threaten. It's enough to threaten escalation to paralyze the other side's resolve. The real threat from Russia to NATO looks different than a classic invasion. These are sabotage operations against infrastructure, cables, pipelines, railways, cyber attacks on power systems, disinformation campaigns, support for radical political forces within the alliance. None of this crosses the threshold of Article 5, but it creates chaos and pressure. The only scenario that truly worries analysts is not a strong Russia attacking NATO, but rather a weak one. Cornered. Russia starting to make irrational decisions, a regime that sees. A regime facing inevitable military defeat could theoretically resort to limited nuclear use, hoping that the fear of escalation would force the West to stop. This is called an escalation for de-escalation strategy. It is this, not conventional war, that is the main source of risk. There's no need to fear a physical invasion of Poland or history. What you should be afraid of is something else. The unpredictability of a regime that has nuclear weapons and nothing to lose. By the way, sometimes people ask a very interesting question. What if Russia and Israel somehow get into a conflict? This is hypothetical, of course, but it's an illustrative scenario. Precisely because it exposes Russia's real military potential compared to a small but exceptionally technologically advanced country. First and foremost, such a war is practically impossible geopolitically. Russia and Israel have historically maintained pragmatic relations. About 1 million people from the former USSR live in Israel. Both countries have operated in Syria for years under a deconfliction mechanism. They agreed not to strike each other, even when their interests overlapped. They have no shared borders, no territorial dispute. A war between them would require several incredible chains of events, so it's more of a thought experiment. Nevertheless, if we reason purely hypothetically, there would be no winner. That's because both countries possess nuclear weapons. Russia officially, Israel unofficially. According to various estimates, Israel's arsenal ranges from 80 to 400 warheads. This means that any attempt to deliver an existential strike against Israel will immediately activate the so-called Samson Doctrine. Well, that is, to shake, so to speak, the world, so that it comes crashing down on everyone's heads. This is a guaranteed retaliatory strike against the aggressor. Israel has made it absolutely clear that it will act this way. Speaking of conventional capabilities, Israel has one of the most technologically advanced armies in the world. Per capita, its air force is equipped with F-35s and F-15 SE. The pilots are trained at a level that, well, at least in Ukraine, the Russian Air Force clearly does not demonstrate. Israeli electronic warfare systems and cyber capabilities are elite even by NATO standards. Multi-layered air defense, Iron Dome, David's Sling, Arrow. They provide sheer density, dense coverage of a small territory. Besides, Russia and Israel do not share a common border. Russia would have to project power across the Mediterranean, and in doing so, it would automatically enter into conflict with the U.S., which has ironclad commitments to Israel's security. Conclusion. In a conventional confrontation, Israel is capable of inflicting unacceptable damage on Russia and successfully defend its territory. Russia physically cannot conquer Israel. It's too far, too expensive, too risky. This is a classic case where there is no winner in the traditional sense, and the conflict itself would end in disaster for both countries. Let's go back to Russia, to demographics, to the labor shortage. The demographic crisis is manifested in the economy, first and foremost through a shortage of people. In 2025 and 2026, Russia recorded a record level of unfilled job vacancies. Do you know how many? It's hard to even imagine. That's how many people live in Israel. 45 million jobs. Unemployment is formally low. This doesn't reflect prosperity, but rather an acute shortage of workers. Real wages. They increased by 52% from 2022 to 2025, not as a result of increased productivity, but because of competition for a shrinking labor force. This fuels inflation, which remains at double-digit levels. The military-industrial complex has drawn a significant share of the workforce. Defense plants there are operating in 3 shifts. They offer salaries that are unattainable for the civilian sector. As a result, hospitals, schools, and civilian industries are experiencing a severe shortage of personnel. Russia's scientific and technological potential has historically been one of the country's main assets. The war has dealt a devastating blow to it. According to estimates by IT associations, in 2022 alone, between 100,000 and 150,000 IT specialists left Russia. Many have integrated into life in Armenia, Georgia, Israel, the Emirates, and Germany, and they have no intention of returning. Academic science is cut off from the global scientific community. Participation in international conferences is limited. Joint publications have become legally risky. Subscriptions to foreign databases have long been frozen. The average age of a Russian researcher is steadily increasing, but this is a sure sign of the decline of the research tradition. Western sanctions have cut off the supply of microelectronics, CNC machines, and optics, as well as special alloys. Workaround schemes through China, the Emirates, and Turkey allow components to be imported, but they do not eliminate the technological lag. The development of modern drones, artificial intelligence systems, and hypersonic missiles requires world-class specialists. There are fewer and fewer of them. The civilian consumer market, which Russian manufacturing is unable to fill, and dependence on China is growing. China is dictating the terms more and more strictly, naturally. According to independent demographers' estimates, if the current demographic trends continue, the population of Russia will decrease to 138 million people by 2035. The key factor: demographic echo. What is it? The smaller generation born in the 90s is entering its peak reproductive age, and it is not able to ensure an increase in the birth rate. The number of women aged 20 to 35 has decreased by about 1/3 compared to the early 2000s. No amount of maternity capital will change this arithmetic. By 2030-2035, there will be 1.5 working people for every pensioner. This is a harbinger of a pension crisis and an increase in the social burden on the budget. The technological gap with leading powers will only get worse. In a few decades, the country risks finding itself in a situation where it will physically be unable to reproduce military equipment of the same level of complexity. What's going on? What's being made today? It won't be able to reach the level of complexity that exists today. And it's important to understand this. In demography, the near future is a horizon of 10 to 15 years, because all the people who will enter the labor market by 2035 have already been born. The decisions made today will yield the first tangible results in 18 to 25 years. Russia has already predetermined its demographic problems for at least the next 2 decades, regardless of what will be decided tomorrow. Russia's demographic crisis is a tragedy for millions of people alive today. Real lives, broken families, discoveries never made. You can't talk about this without feeling compassion for those who became victims not of their own, but of someone else's decisions. But if you zoom out, if you take a broader view, at Europe, at the world order, at the long-term security prospects, the picture looks different. Russia in 2035 will be significantly less capable of large-scale military aggression than Russia in 2022, not because it will be wiser, but because it simply won't have the people. There won't be money, and there won't be technology. Democracy is a tough but reliable constraint on imperial ambitions. History offers examples of countries that seemed doomed but found a way out. Germany after 1945, Japan after the same upheavals, South Korea, which rose from the ashes. The path to recovery always begins with an honest diagnosis. And that's why it's important to call things by their proper names, not to give in to panic or illusions. Europe today is stronger, more united, and better armed than it was in 2021. NATO has expanded. Ukraine has endured. And demographics is a slow but relentless force. And right now it works against revanchism, not in its favor. Democracy where? Demography is destiny, written in a slow but relentless hand. Russia has been reading this message for 30 years, unwilling to acknowledge it. But this record is our main source of sobriety. Calm optimism. If you found this material useful, subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you don't miss new episodes. And for $4 a month, you'll get access to the extended channel, exclusive analyses, and early access to new materials. The link is in the description. Ladies and gentlemen, all numerical estimates of military losses and migration are based on data from Western intelligence agencies, independent democratic research, open sources such as Mediazona, Istories, ISLED, UKMOD, Rostat, and so on. Official Russian statistics on military losses are now unavailable or deliberately understated. So we have to use a bunch of informative sources in order to, given that everyone is lying, figure out where their accounts overlap. That's all. So we'll finish here and see you next time. See you tomorrow. Goodbye.